Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to dive into the world of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager. We've gotten some really interesting stuff from you guys, articles, videos about them, Elon Musk, political corruption, Donald Trump. It's a lot, but I guess we're trying to figure out just how much influence this financial giant really has, from our wallets all the way to global politics.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me how much is unknown about how BlackRock operates. There are all these theories out there about their influence. We really want to get into what's real, what's not, and I guess most importantly, why it should matter to anyone listening.
So BlackRock manages like trillions of dollars.
Right.
I mean, that's more than most countries' entire GDPs. It kind of sounds like they're secretly running the world from some like evil lair.
Uh-huh. Well, maybe not that dramatic. They are what's called an asset manager. So basically, they invest money on behalf of their clients, and those are mostly big institutions like pension funds, the things that hold your retirement accounts.
Right.
It's the scale, though, that's so crazy. It's almost $10 trillion.
Wow. So how did they get so big? Are they just like the best investors ever?
It's a bit more complicated than that. BlackRock's growth is really tied to index funds becoming so popular. Instead of like picking specific stocks, these funds just track the entire market, kind of like betting on the whole stock market to go up instead of individual companies. And this passive investing, it's lower risk, usually offers steadier returns, and it's way cheaper to manage. So it's super profitable for companies like BlackRock.
So they're making money by betting on the market as a whole, but if they own a little bit of everything, doesn't that give them just a huge amount of power?
Yeah, you're getting it. That's what's called universal ownership. And it leads to some pretty strange situations. Think about it. Since BlackRock profits, when the market as a whole does well, some experts think they might not actually want the companies they own to compete too much, because less competition could mean those companies can raise prices and they don't have to innovate as much.
Wait, so you're saying because they own a piece of practically every company, they make more money when companies don't try to beat each other?
That's one of the theories out there. And, it's not just about like how much you pay for your new phone or whatever. Some economists even suggest this universal ownership model might be one reason why wages have been stuck for so long.
Hold on, are you saying BlackRock could be the reason I haven't gotten a raise? How does that even work?
It comes down to what BlackRock focuses on, which is maximizing returns for their clients, which basically translates to squeezing as much profit as possible out of the companies they own. So the idea is that those companies might prioritize those profits over things like giving their employees raises. It makes you wonder who this system is actually benefiting.
Yeah, it's kind of unsettling. The stuff you sent me also talked about this revolving door between BlackRock and the government. Like former government officials end up working at BlackRock and people from BlackRock end up in government. It seems a little too cozy, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. That coziness raises some pretty serious questions about conflicts of interest. When the lines are blurred between the people who are supposed to regulate the financial system and the people making money off of it, it really erodes public trust.
It definitely makes you wonder. And, this reminds me of that whole thing with Elon Musk and SpaceX and the FAA. Like, Musk keeps getting these huge government contracts while the agency in charge of regulating him is getting its budget cut.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of how these intertwined relationships can raise eyebrows. It just makes you wonder.
Speaking of questionable decisions, some of the stuff you sent talked about Donald Trump and some things he did that raised some red flags. Didn't he try to, loosen anti-corruption laws?
You're remembering right. He tried to change the rules so it would essentially be okay for U.S. companies to bribe foreign officials to get contracts.
Wait, he wanted to make bribing legal.
Well, he didn't say it like that, but it caused a huge controversy because critics saw it as basically giving companies permission to act unethically if it meant making more money. It goes back to that idea of public trust. When it seems like leaders are putting personal gain over doing what's right, people start to lose faith in the whole system.
That makes sense. And then there's that whole Trump-Zelensky thing. Their relationship started out pretty friendly, but it went downhill quickly.
It did. It started with a whistleblower complaint that said Trump pressured Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden, who was his political rival, in exchange for U.S. military aid.
Oh, right, that quid pro quo thing.
Exactly. And there's this transcript of a phone call between them that Trump himself released that seemed to support at least some of what the whistleblower said. In it, Trump asked Zelensky to do us a favor and investigate Biden and his son Hunter, who had some business dealings in Ukraine.
And that's what got Trump impeached the first time, right?
Yeah. The House of Representatives impeached him for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. But the Senate ended up acquitting him on both charges.
So it was pretty partisan, as you might expect, but it definitely raised some big questions about Trump's presidency.
Absolutely. It showed how dangerous it can be when a president uses his office for his own political gain, especially when it involves pressuring a foreign leader and using something as important as military aid as leverage. It also shows how important whistleblowers are in holding powerful people accountable.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even in a system where power is concentrated at the top, individuals can still make a difference.
And that brings us back to individual responsibility. We've been talking about these big systemic forces that shape our world. But we also got to remember, we all have a role to play in demanding better from our leaders, our institutions, and even from ourselves.
That's a really great point, and it's something I think we all need to hear. Let's talk more about this after a quick break. It's kind of crazy how everything seems so connected. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I want to go back to index funds for a sec. You said they're like a big reason why BlackRock's gotten so huge.
Yeah.
But are they like bad? Are index funds a bad thing?
Well, that's a good question. The answer is, well, it's complicated. See, index funds can be good for regular investors like you and me. They're a simple way to diversify your portfolio and potentially get some decent returns without needing to be, a Wall Street guru. The potential problem comes when you have a few giant asset managers like BlackRock controlling like most of the money going into these funds. That concentration of power could lead to those distortions in the market, the ones we were just talking about.
So it's not really about index funds themselves being good or bad. It's more about what happens when a handful of powerful players are calling all the shots.
Exactly. It raises concerns about the systemic risks that can emerge when too much power gets concentrated in the hands of a few.
I think I'm starting to see the bigger picture here, but I gotta be honest, it feels a little overwhelming. We're talking about these massive forces that are shaping the world, and it's hard to know what I, as like one person, can even do about it.
I get that feeling. But it's important to remember that these systems are made up of people making decisions. And people can change. That's why understanding all of this is so important. The more people who grasp how these power dynamics work, the more likely we are to demand change and actually create a system that's more fair and accountable. And think about this, your retirement savings. The ones probably invested in those very index funds could be directly impacted by these dynamics.
So knowledge is power in this case. What can people actually do if they're worried about BlackRock's influence or any of the stuff we've been talking about?
Well, there are a few things you can do. For one, you can choose to invest your money in funds that are managed by smaller companies that have a different approach. You could look for funds that prioritize things you care about, like environmental sustainability or social responsibility. That's what some people call ESG investing. You can also support policies that promote more transparency and accountability in the financial system. Things like stricter regulations for asset managers or campaign finance reform to reduce the influence of corporate money in politics, or even stronger protections for whistleblowers.
So we can vote with our dollars and with our votes.
Absolutely. We need to elect leaders who understand these complex issues and who are actually willing to take action to make the economy fairer and more sustainable. Leaders who will put the public good ahead of the interests of just a select few.
This is making a lot more sense now. It sounds like being an informed voter is super important. But going back to corruption for a minute, can you talk more about Trump's attempts to weaken those anti-bribery laws? What was his thinking there?
Well, his stated goal was to make U.S. companies more competitive globally. The argument was that other countries weren't playing by the rules and were using bribes to win contracts, and that American companies were at a disadvantage because of it.
But didn't people say that would just lead to everyone trying to outbribe each other?
Yeah, that was a big concern. Critics said that abandoning ethical principles for short-term economic gain would end up hurting everyone in the long run. It would undermine the rule of law, erode public trust, and create a system where success is determined by who can pay the biggest bribe, not by actual innovation or hard work.
So it's like you might win a few battles but lose the whole war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really shows how important it is to have ethics and values at the heart of any economic system.
I'm seeing a theme here: transparency, accountability, and ethical behavior. It seems like those are the principles that should be guiding our systems, whether we're talking about giant asset managers or presidents.
I completely agree.
Let's go back to that Trump-Zelensky situation for a bit. It seemed like a turning point in their relationship. What exactly went down?
Well, like we said, it started out pretty friendly. Both of them were political outsiders who came into power promising change.
Right, they both had that anti-establishment vibe.
Yeah. But things took a sharp turn when that whistleblower complaint came out. It alleged that Trump had pressured Zelensky to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden, in exchange for U.S. military aid.
Oh, yeah, that quid pro quo scandal.
Right. And that transcript of their phone call, the one Trump released himself, seemed to back up at least some of what the whistleblower was saying. In it, Trump asked Zelensky to do us a favor and look into Biden and his son Hunter, who was involved in some business dealings in Ukraine.
And that's what led to Trump's first impeachment.
Yep. The House of Representatives impeached him for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. But then the Senate acquitted him on both charges.
It was a pretty partisan thing, as you might expect, but it definitely raised some serious questions about Trump's actions as president.
Absolutely. It highlighted the danger of a president using his position for his own political gain, especially when it involves putting pressure on a foreign leader and using crucial military aid as a bargaining chip. It also showed how important it is to protect whistleblowers so people can speak up without fear of retaliation.
It's a good reminder that even in a system where power is concentrated at the top, individuals can still make a difference.
Which brings us right back to individual responsibility. We've been talking about these huge systemic forces that shape the world. But we also need to remember that we all have a role to play in demanding better from our leaders, our institutions, and even from ourselves.
That's a powerful message and something we all need to hear. What are your thoughts on Elon Musk and the whole SpaceX FAA thing?
It's a great example of how complex these power dynamics can be. On the one hand, you have Musk, who's this incredibly innovative guy pushing the boundaries of space exploration and technology. There's no doubt he's making significant contributions to human progress. On the other hand, you have these concerns about whether the rules and regulations are keeping up with how quickly technology is evolving.
So it's like we're trying to figure out how to balance innovation with responsible oversight.
Exactly. We want to encourage progress, but we also want to make sure it's done safely and ethically,
Right.
and that it benefits all of us, not just the select few.
This deep dive has really given us a lot to think about. It's clear that we're facing some pretty big challenges as a society, from the power of these huge corporations to the erosion of trust in our political systems. But we can do things to address these challenges.
We've talked about the power of informed action, ethical behavior, and holding our leaders accountable. It's time to put those principles into practice.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you're feeling informed and empowered and ready to engage with these important issues. We encourage you to keep learning, asking those tough questions, and demanding better from the world around us.
Yeah, it feels like there's just so much to think about with all these incredibly powerful people and companies. We've talked about BlackRock corruption, Elon Musk, even former President Trump. It's a lot. So what's like the one big takeaway for someone listening to all this?
I think the biggest thing is just awareness. We need to be more aware of how these power dynamics are playing out all around us, whether it's the influence of a huge asset manager like BlackRock or the actions of someone like Elon Musk. We need to see it and understand it.
Okay, awareness is important, but what can we actually do about it? It's easy to feel kind of powerless when you're up against these massive forces.
That's where I think informed action comes in. We can't just sit back and complain. We have to use our voices, our votes, and even our wallets to push for change.
Can you give some specific examples? Sure. When it comes to something like BlackRock and how your money's invested, you can explore options like ESG investing. That stands for environmental, social, and governance factors. Basically means putting your money in funds that align with your values. Or you can support policies that promote greater transparency and accountability in the financial system.
What about when it comes to holding our leaders accountable for political corruption?
That's where being an informed voter is so crucial. We need to really pay attention to where candidates stand on issues like campaign finance reform, lobbying transparency, ethics rules, and then hold them accountable for what they do once they're actually in office.
So it sounds like the answer is to be informed citizens, participate in the political process, and be mindful of where we put our money.
Yeah, that's a great way to sum it up. And it's also about having the courage to speak out against corruption or unethical behavior. We can't just let those things slide. We have to call them out and demand better from our leaders.
Thinking back to that whole SpaceX and FAA situation, it really shows how tricky things can get when the government and powerful companies have such close ties.
You're right. It makes you question how effective our current system of oversight really is. Do we need stronger regulations to prevent those kinds of situations? Should there be more protections for whistleblowers so people feel safe coming forward? These are all questions we need to be asking.
It seems like we need a system that consistently prioritizes the public good over private interests.
Exactly. And that requires a shift in mindset, both among our leaders and us regular citizens. We have to think about the long-term consequences of our actions, not just the short-term gains.
This deep dive has really given us a lot to think about. It's clear that we're facing some huge challenges as a society, from the influence of these giant corporations to the declining trust in our political systems. But it's not hopeless. There are things we can do.
We've talked about the power of informed, action-ethical behavior and holding our leaders accountable. Now it's time to actually put those principles into practice.
Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive into BlackRock and, everything else we ended up talking about. Big thanks to everyone for listening and sending us this awesome source material. We hope you learned something new and that you'll keep asking those tough questions and demanding better from the world around you.